The gunshot that killed Thomas Zimmerman echoed across the mesa on a Tuesday morning in March of 1878, and by Friday, his widow Adelaide was alone on 300 acres of scrubland with nothing but grief and an empty pantry to her name. She stood in the kitchen of the small ranch house, staring at the last handful of cornmeal in a tin canister, her hands trembling as she tried to remember when she had last eaten a full meal. Thomas had been shot during a dispute over water rights with a neighboring rancher, a senseless death that left her reeling. The funeral had taken what little money they had saved, and now she faced the brutal reality that she had no idea how to survive on this land. At 23 years old, Adelaide had come west from Philadelphia 2 years ago as a bride, full of dreams and hope. Thomas had promised her a good life, and he had tried his best, but he had done all the hunting, all the heavy work, all the things that kept them fed through the harsh New Mexico winters. She could cook and clean and tend a small garden, but the garden was weeks away from producing anything, and the chickens had been stolen 3 nights ago by something with sharp teeth and sharper claws. Adelaide mixed the cornmeal with water and fried it into a thin cake that tasted like desperation. She ate half and saved half, knowing that tomorrow she would have nothing at all. The ranch stretched out before her in every direction, dotted with piñon pines and juniper trees, full of life she did not know how to claim. Rabbits darted through the brush. Deer moved like ghosts at dawn. Quail called from the rocky outcroppings. All of it might as well have been on the moon for all the good it did her. She had tried setting snares the way she had seen Thomas do it, but whatever logic governed the placement of rope and bent branches eluded her completely. For 3 days she checked her pathetic traps and found nothing but her own failure staring back at her. Her dresses were already hanging loose on her frame, and she caught herself moving slower, thinking slower, as hunger became her constant companion. On the 6th day after she ate the last of the cornmeal, Adelaide walked to town with the notion of selling something, anything, but she had already sold Thomas's good rifle to pay for his burial. She had sold his pocket watch to the doctor who had tried and failed to save him. She had nothing left of value except the land itself, and she knew that vultures were already circling, waiting for her to fail so they could buy the ranch for pennies on the dollar. The same man who had killed Thomas would likely be first in line, and the thought made her stomach turn with something stronger than hunger. She was walking back toward the ranch empty-handed, dizzy and defeated, when she stumbled on the rutted road and fell hard onto her knees. The impact sent stars shooting across her vision, and she knelt there in the dust, fighting back tears of frustration and fear. She was going to die out here. She was going to starve to death on land that should have sustained her, and there was not a single thing she could do about it. "Madam, you hurt," the voice came from above her, and Adelaide looked up to see a man on horseback, his face shadowed by the brim of a well-worn hat. He swung down from the saddle with easy grace and crouched beside her, his eyes full of concern. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with sun-darkened skin and the lean build of someone who spent his life working outdoors. His eyes were a startling blue-green, like water in a desert spring, and when he offered his hand, she took it without thinking. "I am fine," she said, but her voice sounded thin even to her own ears. "Just clumsy." "When did you last eat?" he asked, and the directness of the question caught her off guard. She tried to pull her hand away, but he held it gently, studying her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed. "You are Adelaide Zimmerman, are you not? I heard about your husband. I am sorry for your loss." "Thank you," she whispered, and then, because the kindness in his voice made her defenses crumble, she added, "It has been 2 days since I had anything but water." His jaw tightened, and he helped her to her feet with careful strength. "My name is Aaron Vance. I have been working a claim about 10 miles north of here, and I am heading into Pinyon for supplies. Let me buy you a meal." Pride made her want to refuse, but hunger was a more powerful force. She nodded, and he helped her up onto his horse before swinging up behind her. His arm came around her waist to hold the reins, and she felt the solid warmth of him at her back, steady and real in a world that had become untethered and strange. In the small restaurant attached to the general store, Aaron ordered her a plate of beef and beans and fresh bread. And then he sat across from her and nursed a cup of coffee while she tried not to eat like a starving animal. The food was the most delicious thing she had ever tasted, and she had to force herself to eat slowly, to not make herself sick after days of deprivation. "How long have you been going without?" Aaron asked quietly, and Adelaide set down her fork, suddenly ashamed. "The chickens were taken a week ago," she said. "I ran out of supplies 3 days after Thomas died. I used everything we had for the funeral, and I do not know how to hunt. I tried setting snares, but I must be doing it wrong because I have caught nothing." Aaron leaned back in his chair, his eyes thoughtful. "You are on the old Zimmerman place, correct? The one with the creek running through the north pasture," she nodded. "Yes, but I will not be there much longer, I suspect. I cannot pay the property taxes that will come due in the fall, and I cannot survive the summer without food." "That is fine land," Aaron said slowly. "Your husband had water and game and good grazing. You should not be starving on a ranch like that." "I do not know how to take advantage of any of it," Adelaide said bitterly. "I can cook what is provided, but I cannot provide it for myself. Thomas always did the hunting. He always brought home the meat. I watched him do it 100 times, but watching and doing are not the same thing." Aaron was quiet for a long moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. Then he said, "I could teach you." Adelaide looked up sharply. "What?" "I could teach you to hunt," he said. "I could show you how to track game, how to shoot, how to dress out an animal and preserve the meat. It would take time, but you are clearly a smart woman. You could learn." "Why would you do that?" she asked, suspicion and hope warring in her chest. "You do not know me." "Because I know what it is like to be hungry," Aaron said simply. "I know what it is like to be alone in a hard place. And because no one should starve on good land just because they were never taught the skills they needed." He paused, then added, "I would not ask anything inappropriate if that is what concerns you. I would teach you, and in return, perhaps you would allow me to camp on the southern edge of your property. The claim I have been working is played out, and I need to find a new place to settle. If you are not using that land, it would save me from having to find another spot." It was a reasonable exchange, and Adelaide could see the sincerity in his face. She thought of the empty pantry at home, the weakness in her limbs, the terror of facing another day without food. "When could you start?" she asked. "Tomorrow morning," Aaron said, "if you are willing." "I am willing," Adelaide said, and felt something shift inside her, a small spark of hope in the darkness. Aaron rode with her back to the ranch that evening, leading his pack horse behind them. He insisted on giving her supplies from his own stock, hardtack and dried meat and coffee, enough to last her a few days. She protested, but he brushed off her concerns with quiet certainty. "You cannot learn to hunt if you are too weak to hold a rifle," he said, and that was the end of the discussion. He set up his camp in a clearing near the creek, far enough from the house to be proper, but close enough that she could call for him if she needed help. Adelaide watched him work in the fading light, his movements efficient and practiced, as he raised a canvas tent and built a fire ring. She realized she knew almost nothing about this man who had appeared at exactly the moment she needed him most, and part of her wondered if she was being foolish to trust him. But another part of her, the part that was tired and scared and desperate, recognized something in Aaron Vance. He was someone who understood what it meant to survive against the odds, and right now, that was exactly what she needed. That night, Adelaide lay in her bed and ate a piece of the dried meat Aaron had given her, chewing slowly and savoring every bite. For the first time since Thomas died, she felt like she might actually live through this. Aaron arrived at the house just after dawn, carrying a rifle that was older than Adelaide but clearly well-maintained. "This was my first hunting rifle," he said. "It is not as powerful as a newer model, but it is reliable, and the kick will not knock you over. We will start with the basics." He spent the morning teaching her how to hold the weapon, how to sight down the barrel, how to breathe and squeeze the trigger rather than pulling it. They practiced on tin cans set up on fence posts, and Adelaide was surprised by how much there was to learn. Her first shots went wild, kicking up dust several feet from the target, but Aaron was patient. He adjusted her stance, showed her how to compensate for wind, explained the mechanics of aim and follow through. By noon she had hit 3 cans in a row, and the grin he gave her was worth more than gold. "You have a steady hand," he said approvingly. "That is half the battle." They ate a simple lunch of beans and coffee, sitting in the shade of the ramada Thomas had built behind the house. Adelaide asked Aaron about himself, hungry for understanding, and he told her his story in his quiet, measured way. He had come west from Missouri 7 years ago, working as a cowboy on various ranches, trying his hand at prospecting, always moving on when the work dried up or the claim proved worthless. He had no family left back east, no ties binding him to any particular place. He was, he said with a wry smile, a tumbleweed looking for somewhere to put down roots. "That must be lonely," Adelaide said softly, and Aaron looked at her with those startling eyes. "It can be," he admitted, "but freedom has its own rewards." In the afternoon, he took her out onto the ranch land to teach her about tracking. He showed her how to read the signs animals left behind, the pressed grass where a rabbit had passed, the distinctive hoof prints of deer, the scratches on tree bark where elk rubbed their antlers. Adelaide followed him through the piñon and juniper, fascinated by this whole language of the wilderness she had never noticed before. Aaron moved through the landscape like he was part of it, reading the story of the land with effortless skill. "There," he said quietly, pointing to a cluster of bushes about 50 yards ahead. "See the way those branches are moving? That is not wind." Adelaide squinted and saw the flick of a white tail, the tawny hide of a mule deer browsing on new growth. Her heart started to pound, and Aaron handed her the rifle. "Take your time," he murmured. "Remember everything we practiced this morning." She raised the rifle to her shoulder, feeling the weight of it, the solidity. The deer lifted its head, and for a moment Adelaide thought it was going to bolt. She found the sight, lined it up the way Aaron had taught her, breathed out slowly and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked across the afternoon, and the deer leaped and fell. Adelaide stood frozen, shocked that she had actually hit it, and Aaron was already moving forward. "Quick and clean," he said approvingly. "You did well." He showed her how to field dress the animal, a process that was messier and more difficult than Adelaide had imagined. She had to fight down queasiness as Aaron explained what he was doing, but she forced herself to pay attention to learn. This was survival. This was life out here. If she was going to make it on her own, she needed to understand all of it. They carried the meat back to the ranch house, and Aaron spent the evening showing her how to butcher it properly, how to wrap portions for immediate use, and how to preserve the rest with salt and smoke. It was hard work, but when they were finished, Adelaide had more meat than she had seen in months, enough to last her weeks if she was careful. "Thank you," she said as the stars came out overhead, and the words felt pitifully inadequate for what Aaron had given her. "You earned it," Aaron said. "You made that shot. I just showed you where to aim." Over the following weeks, Aaron became a constant presence on the ranch. He taught her to set snares properly and check them every morning. He showed her how to fish in the creek using a line and hook, how to find bird eggs in the rocky outcroppings, how to identify which plants were edible and which would make her sick. Every skill he shared was a piece of armor against starvation, and Adelaide absorbed the lessons with fierce determination. But it was not just the practical knowledge that mattered. Aaron brought something else to the ranch, something Adelaide had not realized she was missing until it was there. He brought companionship. He brought conversation and laughter and the simple comfort of not being alone. They fell into a routine. Aaron would arrive at the house each morning, and they would work together, hunting or fishing or tending to the endless tasks the ranch required. He helped her repair the chicken coop, and then rode into Pinyon to buy new hens to replace the ones that had been taken. He fixed the leak in the roof she had been ignoring and reinforced the fence around the small vegetable garden. In return, Adelaide cooked proper meals for both of them, using the meat and fish they caught, baking bread in the cast iron stove, making coffee strong enough to wake the dead. They talked while they worked, sharing stories and opinions and dreams. Adelaide told him about Philadelphia, about the brick row house where she had grown up, about the strange adjustment to the vast open spaces of New Mexico territory. Aaron told her about growing up on a hardscrabble farm in Missouri, about the war that had taken his father and older brother, about the restlessness that had driven him west in search of something he could not quite name. "You regret coming here?" Aaron asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Adelaide considered the question carefully. "I regret how it turned out," she said finally. "I regret that Thomas is gone, but I do not regret the choice to come west. There is something about this land that gets into your blood. Even when it is hard, even when it is trying to kill you, it is beautiful." "It is," Aaron agreed, but he was looking at her when he said it, not at the landscape, and Adelaide felt heat rise in her cheeks. She was acutely aware that she was starting to feel things she should not feel. She was a widow, still in mourning, and it had been less than 2 months since Thomas died. But Aaron made her feel alive in a way she had almost forgotten was possible. When he smiled at her, she felt warm all the way through. When his hand brushed hers as they worked together, her skin tingled. When he looked at her with those blue-green eyes, she felt seen in a way that was both terrifying and exhilarating. She tried to tell herself it was just gratitude, just the natural result of him saving her life and teaching her to survive. But late at night, lying alone in her bed, she knew it was more than that. She was falling for Aaron Vance, falling hard and fast, and she had no idea what to do about it. Aaron, for his part, seemed content to maintain a respectful distance. He never touched her beyond what was necessary, never said anything that could be construed as improper. But sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression she could not quite read, something hungry and hopeful and carefully restrained. In late May, nearly 3 months after Thomas had died, Aaron taught Adelaide to hunt on horseback. He had been working with Thomas's horse, a steady gelding named Copper, getting the animal used to the sound of gunfire and the smell of blood. Now he pronounced both horse and woman ready for a real hunt. They rode out at dawn, moving through the awakening landscape with the patience of predators. Aaron spotted a small herd of pronghorn antelope grazing in a meadow, and they dismounted to approach on foot. Adelaide made the shot from nearly 100 yards out, a distance that would have seemed impossible to her 3 months ago. The animal dropped, and Aaron let out a low whistle of appreciation. "You are a natural at this," he said, and the pride in his voice made Adelaide's chest swell with satisfaction. They spent the day processing the meat, working side by side with an ease born of long practice. Adelaide found herself studying Aaron when he was not looking, admiring the sure movements of his hands, the strength in his shoulders, the way the sun brought out bronze highlights in his dark hair. She wanted to reach out and touch him, wanted to close the distance between them, but she held herself back. It was too soon. People would talk. It was not proper. That evening, as they sat by the fire outside Aaron's tent cooking antelope steaks, a rider approached from the direction of town. Adelaide tensed, recognizing the man as Cyrus Grant, the rancher whose dispute with Thomas had led to his death. Grant had claimed self-defense, and there had been no witness to contradict him, so he walked free while Thomas lay in the ground. "Mrs. Zimmerman," Grant said, touching the brim of his hat in a mockery of respect. "I heard you were still squatting on this land. I came to make you an offer." "I am not squatting," Adelaide said coldly, rising to her feet. "This is my property." "For now," Grant said with an oily smile. "But taxes come due in the fall, and I doubt you have the funds to pay them. I am prepared to offer you $200 for the ranch. That is more than generous considering the circumstances." "The ranch is worth 10 times that," Adelaide said, her voice shaking with anger. "And I am not selling." "You are going to lose it anyway," Grant said, his smile fading. "You might as well take my money and move on. A woman alone has no business trying to run a ranch." "The lady said she is not selling," Aaron said quietly, and there was something in his tone that made Grant's horse sidestep nervously. Grant looked at Aaron as if noticing him for the first time. "Who are you?" "A friend," Aaron said, standing up. He did not raise his voice or make any threatening gestures, but there was a coiled readiness to him that made Grant's hand drift toward the pistol on his hip. "You looking to take over where Zimmerman left off?" Grant asked, his eyes moving between Aaron and Adelaide with an ugly insinuation. "I am looking to make sure a widow is not cheated out of her property," Aaron said evenly. "Now, you made your offer and she declined. I suggest you move on." For a moment Adelaide thought Grant was going to push the issue, but something in Aaron's steady gaze made him think better of it. He wheeled his horse around with a curse and rode off into the gathering darkness, leaving a wake of tension behind him. "He is not going to give up," Adelaide said quietly. "He wants this land, and he thinks he can bully me into selling." "Then we will make sure you can pay those taxes," Aaron said, his jaw set with determination. "Between the hunting and what your garden is starting to produce, we can save enough by fall. And I have some money set aside from my last claim. It was not much, but it would help." "I cannot take your money," Adelaide protested, but Aaron shook his head. "You are not taking it. Consider it an investment. If I am going to be camping on this land, I have a vested interest in making sure it stays in friendly hands." It was practical reasoning, but Adelaide heard something more beneath the words. She looked at Aaron in the firelight, this man who had appeared in her darkest moment and given her the tools to save herself. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked softly. "The truth, Aaron." He met her eyes, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Then he said, "Because I see something worth fighting for when I look at you, Adelaide. I see strength and courage and a determination that most men I have known would envy. And because somewhere along the way, teaching you to hunt and sharing meals with you and fixing fences, I started to imagine a future I never thought I would want." Adelaide's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "What kind of future?" she whispered. "One where I stop being a tumbleweed," Aaron said, taking a careful step toward her. "One where I stay in one place because that place has everything I need." One where I wake up every morning grateful that I took that road at exactly the right time to find a woman who needed help and ended up changing my whole life." "Aaron," Adelaide breathed, and then she was moving, closing the distance between them, and his arms came around her solid and sure. She pressed her face against his chest and felt the steady beat of his heart, and something that had been twisted tight inside her for months finally began to loosen. "Is it too soon?" Aaron asked quietly, his hand coming up to stroke her hair. "Tell me if I am reading this wrong." "It should be too soon," Adelaide said, pulling back enough to look up at him. "I should tell you to wait, to let more time pass, but I feel like I have been waiting my whole life to feel the way I feel when I am with you. You make me want to be brave. You make me want to live, not just survive." "Adelaide," Aaron said, and there was wonder in his voice as he cupped her face in his hands. "May I kiss you?" "Yes," she whispered, and when his lips met hers, it felt like coming home. They kept their relationship quiet at first, more out of consideration for small-town gossip than any real shame. But as spring turned to summer, it became impossible to hide the fact that Aaron Vance had become a permanent fixture on the Zimmerman ranch. He moved his tent closer to the house, helping Adelaide with increasingly ambitious projects. They built a proper smokehouse for preserving meat, expanded the vegetable garden, and began planning for the future in ways that assumed he would be there to see it through. Adelaide had never been happier. The constant fear of starvation was gone, replaced by a sense of security she had never experienced even when Thomas was alive. She and Aaron worked together seamlessly, two people who complemented each other's strengths and covered each other's weaknesses. He taught her everything he knew about living off the land, and she shared her education with him, reading aloud from books in the evenings and teaching him to write more than his basic signature. In August, Aaron rode into Pinyon and came back with a small velvet box. He found Adelaide in the garden, her skirts kilted up as she pulled weeds in the brutal afternoon heat, and he got down on one knee right there in the dirt. "I know I do not have much to offer," he said, opening the box to reveal a simple gold band. "I am still just a cowboy trying to figure out where I belong. But I belong with you, Adelaide. I know that as sure as I know the sun is going to set tonight and rise tomorrow. Will you marry me?" Adelaide looked at this man who had taught her to hunt, who had shared his meat when she was starving, who had given her back her life and then filled it with love. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, Aaron, I will marry you." They were wed in the small church in Pinyon in September of 1878, just 6 months after Thomas had died. Some people in town whispered that it was scandalous, that Adelaide had moved on too quickly. But most folks who knew the full story were simply happy that the widow Zimmerman had found a way to survive. Aaron wore a new shirt Adelaide had sewn for him, and Adelaide wore a simple blue dress that matched the color of Aaron's eyes. The ceremony was short and the celebration modest, but when Aaron kissed his bride, Adelaide felt like the luckiest woman in the territory. They paid the property taxes that fall with money they had saved from selling extra meat and vegetables in town. And Cyrus Grant's face when he heard that the ranch would remain in Adelaide's possession was a thing of beauty. Aaron officially took on the Zimmerman name through common usage, becoming known around Pinyon as Aaron Zimmerman, rancher and hunter, though his legal name remained Vance. It was a compromise that honored Adelaide's first husband while acknowledging her new life. The first year of their marriage was filled with hard work and harder lessons, but they faced it all together. Aaron taught Adelaide to break and train horses, and she turned out to have a natural gift for it. They bought 2 mares and a stallion and began breeding horses to sell, adding a new revenue stream to the ranch. Adelaide's garden flourished under her devoted attention, and she began preserving enough vegetables to last through the winter with plenty left over to trade in town. In the spring of 1879, Adelaide discovered she was pregnant. She told Aaron one evening as they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset, and the look of pure joy on his face was something she would treasure for the rest of her life. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing like a boy, and then set her down with exaggerated gentleness as if she might break. "We are going to have a baby," he said, his hand resting on her still flat stomach with something like reverence. "A real family." "We are already a real family," Adelaide said, covering his hand with hers. "But yes, we are going to add to it." Their son was born in December, a healthy baby with his father's dark hair and his mother's determination. They named him Thomas Aaron, honoring the past while celebrating the future. Aaron proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with the baby when he cried at night, changing diapers without complaint, staring at his son with an expression of amazed wonder that made Adelaide fall in love with him all over again. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were droughts that tested their water supply, harsh winters that killed livestock, moments when money was tight and the future uncertain. But Adelaide and Aaron faced every obstacle the way they faced everything else, together and determined. The skills Aaron had taught Adelaide that first desperate spring served them well through good times and bad. They always had meat on the table because Adelaide could hunt as well as any man in the county. They always had vegetables because she had learned to coax life from the harsh New Mexico soil. They always had horses to sell because she had a gift for training them. In 1881, Adelaide gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, a beautiful baby girl with blonde curls and blue-green eyes like her father's. 2 years later came another son, Samuel, who arrived early and scared them both but proved to be tougher than he looked. The ranch house rang with the sounds of children playing, and Adelaide sometimes stopped in the middle of her work to marvel at how much her life had changed. She thought about that terrible spring when she had been starving on her own land, too ignorant to save herself, and how close she had come to losing everything. Then she would look at Aaron, teaching their oldest son to track rabbits or fixing a saddle while their daughter chattered at his elbow, and she would feel gratitude so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "What are you thinking about?" Aaron asked one evening as they sat on the porch, the children finally asleep inside. It was a scene they had repeated countless times over the years, this quiet moment at the end of a long day. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Adelaide said, leaning against his shoulder. "How lucky I was that you came down that road at exactly the right moment." "I was the lucky one," Aaron said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I was just a tumbleweed before I met you. You gave me roots. You gave me a reason to stay in one place." "We gave each other everything," Adelaide said, and it was the simple truth. Aaron had taught her to hunt when she was starving, sharing his knowledge and his meat when she had nothing. But in return, Adelaide had given him something just as valuable. She had given him a home. She had given him a family. She had given him a purpose beyond simple survival. Together, they had built a life on land that had nearly killed her, turning the harsh New Mexico scrubland into a thriving ranch that would support their children and their children's children. The small herd they started grew over the years, and the horse breeding program Adelaide had developed became known throughout the territory. People came from as far as Santa Fe to buy Zimmerman horses, and Aaron's reputation as a hunter and guide brought in additional income from wealthy Easterners who wanted to experience the Wild West. By 1885, the ranch was prosperous enough that they hired help, young men eager to learn the land the way Aaron had once been. He taught them the same skills he had taught Adelaide, passing on the knowledge that had saved her life. Some of the young cowboys looked at Adelaide with surprise when she rode out with them on hunts, her rifle slung across her back and her eyes sharp for game, but Aaron just smiled with pride. His wife was the best hunter in the county after him, and he made sure everyone knew it. In 1887, Cyrus Grant died of a heart attack, and his ranch was sold off to pay his debts. There was a certain poetic justice in the fact that the land he had coveted ended up being worthless without the water rights Adelaide controlled. She bought a portion of his former property at auction for a fair price, expanding the Zimmerman ranch to nearly 1,000 acres. It was more land than they could ever possibly need, but it felt right somehow, a final vindication of everything she and Aaron had built together. Their children grew up strong and capable, learning to ride and hunt and work the land from the time they could walk. Thomas, the eldest, inherited his mother's gift with horses and his father's steady temperament. Rose proved to be fearless, climbing trees and catching snakes and keeping pace with her brothers in everything. Samuel, the youngest, had a scholar's mind and talked about becoming a doctor, but he still knew how to skin a rabbit and track a deer. On their 10th wedding anniversary in September of 1888, Aaron gave Adelaide a new rifle, a beautiful Winchester with her name engraved on the stock. It was a far cry from the old gun he had lent her that first desperate spring, and Adelaide held it with reverence, understanding what it symbolized. She was not the helpless widow anymore, not the woman who had been starving on her own land. She was Adelaide Zimmerman, rancher and mother, hunter and horsewoman, a woman who had learned to survive and then gone beyond survival to truly thrive. "You remember that day you found me on the road?" Adelaide asked as they lay in bed that night, the house quiet around them. "When I had fallen and could not even stand up on my own. I remember thinking you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen," Aaron said, pulling her close, "even covered in dust and half-starved. I took one look at you and knew my life was about to change." "You changed mine," Adelaide said softly. "You saved it, really. I would have died if you had not come along when you did." "Maybe," Aaron said, "or maybe you would have figured it out on your own." "You are stronger than you think, Adelaide. You always have been." "I am strong because you taught me to be," she said. "You gave me the tools I needed and you believed I could learn. That made all the difference." They were both right, Adelaide reflected as she drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms. She had been strong enough to survive, but Aaron had been the one to show her how. Together, they had created something neither of them could have built alone, a life rich with love and purpose and the deep satisfaction of work well done. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. There were more children, 2 more sons born in the 1890s, until the ranch house was overflowing with life and noise and love. There were hard times too, a drought in 1893 that tested everything they had built, a terrible winter in 1898 that killed half their herd. But Adelaide and Aaron weathered every storm the way they had weathered that first desperate spring, together and determined, and never giving up. In 1900, as the new century dawned, Adelaide stood on the porch of the ranch house and looked out over the land that had nearly killed her 22 years earlier. She was 45 years old now, her hair threaded with silver and her hands roughened by decades of work. But she was healthy and strong, surrounded by the family she and Aaron had built, living on a ranch that bore testament to everything they had accomplished together. Aaron came to stand beside her, his own hair mostly gray now but his eyes still that startling blue-green that had caught her attention so many years ago. He put his arm around her shoulders, and Adelaide leaned into him, comfortable with the weight of him, the solid reality of his presence. "Happy?" he asked, and Adelaide smiled. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she said. "You know, sometimes I try to picture what my life would have been like if you had not come down that road when you did. If you had not stopped to help a starving widow who did not know the first thing about surviving on her own land." "Do not think about that," Aaron said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "That is not the life we lived." "No," Adelaide agreed, watching their children and grandchildren moving around the ranch yard, tending to the animals and the land with the easy competence of people born to this life. "This is the life we lived, and it is perfect." Aaron had taught her to hunt when she needed it most, sharing his meat and his knowledge when she had nothing. From that simple act of kindness had grown a love story that spanned decades, a family that would carry on their legacy, a ranch that would endure long after they were gone. Adelaide had been starving on her own land, but Aaron had shown her how to feed herself, and in the process, they had fed each other's souls. They stood together on the porch as the sun set over the New Mexico landscape, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and Adelaide felt a profound sense of peace. She had survived. She had thrived. She had loved and been loved in return. What more could anyone ask from a life? Inside the house, someone was cooking dinner, filling the air with savory smells. Their youngest grandchild was crying about a scraped knee, being comforted by his mother. The dogs were barking at something in the distance. Life was going on as it always had, as it always would. Aaron squeezed her shoulders gently. "Come on, Adelaide. Dinner will be ready soon." She let him lead her inside, into the warmth and noise and love of the family they had built together. Grateful beyond measure for the cowboy who had taught her to hunt and shared his meat, and in doing so, had given her absolutely everything.